YouTube, and welcome to Select Start Player 1. I'm Al, and in this episode we'll be doing part 2 of our Game Boy Advance review. All things being equal, hopefully this video is going to be a little bit better edited and maybe have some surprises like these things back here, or whatever I ended up deciding to do with this. Yes, that means that I've green screened myself and I have no idea what I'm going to throw back there before I get done editing. So hopefully we'll see you there, and now there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff I'm going to have to cut out and edit, or maybe I'll leave it in. In North America, in June of 2001, the Game Boy Advance came onto the market. It brought with it Super Nintendo level games and graphics. It still suffered from a lack of backlighting, which had plagued most of the Game Boys from their beginning, although it only ran on 2 AA batteries. I remember having my Game Boy Advance during an interesting period of time. I got mine on pre-sale, and one of the things that was a glaring problem with it, glaring, was the screen quality. Even though it was relatively high resolution for the era, it again came out and lacked any kind of lighting. And most of the aftermarket lighting for the Game Boy Advance consisted of worm lights that plugged into the link port. These lights were horrible. A young gentleman who was a college student at the time came out with a kit that was known as the Afterburner kit. And what it did was it added a front lighting accessory to the Game Boy Advance, which, as you can see, we darken the room here, actually makes the Game Boy Advance very viewable. This also helped in normal lighting, and unfortunately, with the camera, we can end up with some glare issues that aren't helped out by the screen at all. Mine's held up pretty well over the years. You can see there's a little separation in the one corner, and I probably rushed the installation on this one since it was the first one I did. I did my wife's as well, and it looked much better, but you can see there's some things trapped underneath the lens that you installed on the Game Boy Advance at the time. There were a lot of interesting accessories for the Game Boy Advance over the years. One of the most notable in this picture right away is a battery pack, which also had a base that you could set the entire Game Boy Advance on while charging. Let me move my kiosk out of the way here. Some of the other accessories that I had gotten over the years was a TV tuner unit. Unfortunately, these are mostly useless now unless you hook up via a cable connector, because they didn't do digital back then, as digital really wasn't a thing in the United States yet. There were also some game-breaking accessories like the Action Replay. And then Nintendo came out with an accessory called the e-reader, which had a card slot on it that it allowed it to read specially designed cards with a fine print border that was actually game code. Now, it usually took several of these if you were doing one of the classic games that came on these. They also used them for add-ons for games like Super Mario Bros. Advance 3 that allowed you to add cheats into the game in-game. And then there were also some Pokemon accessories for this. Then in 2003 they came out with the Game Boy Advance SP. This was the first system since the Game Boy Light from Nintendo to be lit in any way. There ended up being two models over the time that it was out. There was the original Model 100, and then there was a Model 101, which changed the lighting from being front lit to being backlit. The 101 kind of released quietly around the same time as the Nintendo DS, and so there are far fewer units of the backlit model, and this makes it pretty desirable to collectors, as well as the screen was actually almost twice as bright as this model. I only have the original Model 100 because I bought 2 silver units on pre-sale, and then when I found out they were coming out with a black unit, I turned around and bought it on pre-sale as well. So my wife ended up with the silver unit. We gave her sister one of the other silver unit, and then this black one became mine. There were some pretty interesting, unique accessories. As you saw, I had that in a leather case. There also was this Game Changer module called the Gamester. I wonder if John knows somebody else is using the name Gamester. Just kidding, John. It's by Radica, and it's actually a 3-game Switch accessory. So as you can see, under the bottom of it, it has 3 different ports that you can plug Game Boy Advance games into. And then you can take the SP and place it directly on the Gamester and switch between the 3 different games that you have. I also have kind of a neat belt clip unit that you can slide your SP directly into. And don't get me to lying about exactly how this goes together, because I don't remember. In fact, you know what? I think that might be an accessory for the Game Boy Color. Good going, Al. Also, there were a plethora of cases that came out for the SP. Obviously, I like the ones that are the dark blue and black. There's also a nice leather case here that kind of opens up like a book. Here's a nice black and gray one that almost looks like a miniature backpack. Also, one of my favorite storage cases is this hardshell case that was put out that has separate holding spaces for the games and for the unit and for some accessories. In 2005, around the same time as the backlit SP was released, the Game Boy Micro was also released. Again, a relatively quiet release, as most gamers seemed unhappy with the cost, and that this handheld was coming out without support for original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, and was going to be competing at a time when the DS was coming out. It was nice because it included built-in charging like the SP did, but again, because of the timing and the price, the unit's pretty scarce and is pretty highly desired by collectors. They did later come out with a 20th anniversary version of the Game Boy Micro, which is also highly sought after by collectors. As far as games, the Game Boy Micro, or the Game Boy Advance series, has just an absolute ton of games, with everything from reports of original NES games in what they called the Classic series. Japan called them, I believe, the Famicom Mini series, to tons of ports of Super Nintendo games,
Some of my favorite handheld role-playing games are on this system, including both of the Golden Sun games that came out on Advance. So there's a lot of love for the Advance series and a ton of games. If you're just now getting into collecting and you want to get something that has a ton of games, relatively cheap to pick up, but is portable and very useful, I would highly recommend probably picking up an SP, or if you can afford it, a micro, but definitely an SP. Of course, the SP is going to allow you to be able to play original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games as well. So I'd say pick up an SP and check out some of the role-playing games and some of the ports from the Super Nintendo. One last accessory I wanted to mention was the Game Boy Player on the GameCube. This was an accessory that connected to the bottom of the GameCube and required a play disc to be able to access it. This allowed you to play Game Boy Advance titles directly on the GameCube. It allowed you to do some screen resizing, and overall was a really nice accessory. Similar to the way the Super Game Boy worked on Super Nintendo.
So that's our review on the second half of the Game Boy. I hope you enjoyed the stuff about the Game Boy Advance and the Game Boy Micro and the SP and even some of the other custom stuff that we had in there. Like, subscribe if you enjoyed our video. Comment. We try to get back to the comments when we can. Slick start and game on.